So a very good afternoon to those of you just joining us now. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing. I'm the Corporate Events Manager for London South Bank University. Delighted to work with all my colleagues on screen on this event. And before we start, I'm just going to take you through some virtual housekeeping, starting with a short statement around respect and dignity. Whether in person or virtually, LSBU operates an environment built on equality, inclusion and acceptance, and believes everyone should be treated with respect, dignity and courtesy. Please keep the conversation kind and respectful. We reserve the right to remove those who aren't. Just to talk you through the Zoom functionality, it is fantastic to see people making use of the chat box already. Please continue to do so to share your thoughts and comments throughout our debate. You can also share your thoughts and comments on Twitter. And the hashtag is hashtag LSBUFellows21, and I will pop that in the chat box shortly. You'll also see that there is a Q&A function, and I'd like to ask you to reserve your questions for the Q&A box so that they don't get lost in the chat box. You can also upvote on the questions you most want to see answered by clicking the thumbs up symbol next to the question. Do make use of that because we will be relying on that to ask the most popular questions. You'll also see that I've enabled closed captioning, which are the subtitles that you can see on your screen. You can hide them if you click on the little up arrow next to CC live transcript at the bottom of the screen. You can choose to hide those or you can enlarge them. That's all from me. I hope you enjoyed the debate, and I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Suzanne Bench.
Hello, everybody. It's absolutely fantastic to see so many of you joining us this afternoon for the very first debate of our postdoctoral bridging scheme. I just want to take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Suzanne Bench, and I'm a Professor of Critical Care Nursing here at London South Bank University. And I am co-leading this scheme for Health Education England London as a pilot scheme for postdoctoral fellows who are looking to obtain a successful clinical lectureship from the NIHR in the future. And this is part of their development and developing their networks, I suppose. So I'm not going to say anything more, but just to say good luck to you all. I'm really looking forward to the debate that's going to go on. And I'm going to hand you over to the chair who's going to introduce you to everybody else. So over to you, Jen.
Hi everyone, really warm welcome to everyone joining us today. I'm Dr. Jennifer Sutton, a research occupational therapist with South London and the Maudsley NHS Foundation Trust, and a postdoctoral researcher in old age psychiatry at King's College London. We have with us today, making the case for today's motion, we have Dr. Jackie McRae, as consultant speech and language therapist at UCLH and associate professor and director of research in the Centre for Allied Health, Kingston and St George's University, London. We also have Dr. Tim Noblet, a consultant musculoskeletal physiotherapist at St George's University Hospitals and an honorary associate professor with St George's University, London. Making the case against today's motion, we have Dr. Donna Kennedy, a hand therapist and senior clinical academic for occupational therapy at Imperial College Healthcare and the NIHR Imperial Biomedical Research Centre. She's also a postdoctoral fellow in the pain research group with Imperial College London. Finally, arguing against today's motion, we have Dr. Dominic Havestine Franklin, a consultant arts psychotherapist at CNWL, NHS Foundation Trust, and a professor of practice in arts therapies at Brunel University, London. So the question that's up for debate today is whether or not non-medical clinical academics add value through leadership to transformational change within the NHS. So it's a very interesting, quite weighty question that I'm sure is going to provide a lot of interesting debate today. For anybody who isn't familiar with some of the terminology in today's question, a clinical academic is somebody who works across a healthcare provider and an academic institution who has a dual clinical and research role. The term non-medical clinical academic is taken from the NIHR, and that refers to any clinical academic that isn't a doctor or a dentist by professional background. Lastly, the term transformational change refers to an often large-scale change in, for example, a culture, a structure, or a system. So they are just some useful kind of definitions to keep in mind today as the debate goes on. The structure for today's debate is that I will shortly hand over to the panel. They will each have 6 minutes to make their case for or against the motion that non-medical clinical academics do indeed add substantial value to transformational change within the NHS. After this, we'll go to questions from the audience to try and broaden the debate. And then finally, each panel member will have 1 minute to make their rebuttals and make their final case. We're going to be measuring change amongst the audience opinion today through a poll. The poll's going to be administered at the beginning and at the end of the session. So I'm going to hand over to Neil now to start the first poll, please.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Our first poll. Non-medical clinical academics add substantial value through leadership to transformational change within the NHS. Do you agree or disagree? Please place your votes now. And it's great to see those are coming in very swiftly. So we'll keep that going for just a moment. We're nearly at 100% already. So thanks for moving so quickly on that. Just a couple more moments. Okay, just one more moment. Oh, we've got some last ones coming through. Okay, we will call it there. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. So we're going to go through the poll results at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker today, Dr. Jackie McRae, who is making the case for the motion that non-medical clinical academics add substantial value through leadership to transformational change within the NHS. Over to you, Jackie.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Lovely. So as Jen has kindly introduced me, just to let you know that I started my academic journey only 11 years ago when I undertook my MClin Res to evidence my clinical practice working with spinal cord injury patients. I then was fortunate to be awarded the Clinical Doctoral Research Fellowship, which advanced my work, and I'm now very fortunate to be building the next step of my clinical research through the Postdoc Bridging Fellowship. I'm supporting the motion put to you today based on my own experiences and of those of colleagues who are on similar journeys. Next slide, please. So the National Institute of Health Research is one of the key pipelines for developing non-medical clinical academics. And since 2007, NIHR and Health Education England have created an integrated clinical academic programme for what they term non-medical healthcare staff. This allows engagement with staff across experience, banding levels and specialities. And since then, they've trained thousands of staff across the healthcare system to deliver more informed care. When it comes to leadership, remember, this is not management, so all staff are encouraged to influence change and transform care at all levels. I also have to say that other charitable funding is also available. So what is the evidence for impacting change? Next slide, please. So the NHS long-term plan, which I'm sure everyone's read cover to cover, was launched in 2019. And it sets a key goal to see research and innovation to drive future outcomes and improvement. The role of clinical academics has been recognised in that document and embraced in the planning of future change. They say that patients benefit enormously from research and innovation, with breakthroughs enabling prevention of ill health, earlier diagnosis, more effective treatments, better outcomes, and faster recovery. Another key gain is that research and innovation are important for the UK economy, bringing jobs and services. Of course, a key target for the NHS is to improve patient care. So how do clinical academics achieve this? Next slide, please. So in this paper, it reviewed research activity across all English NHS trusts and matched this with staff recommendations to work within their organisation, as well as satisfaction by patients. They reported that there was better quality of information provision to patients, a higher degree of observed staff teamwork with more confidence in the doctors that were treating them, also a good thing, and a better overall inpatient experience, also correlated significantly. So both staff and patients benefited from this change. I'd be interested to explore what is the transformational change. If you can do next slide, please. This systematic review, which was published this year, identified 20 articles that discussed clinical academic activity by non-medical healthcare staff. These were some of the themes that were identified that demonstrate their impact. They reported that clinical academics were able to translate research into practice and implement the evidence. They were able to promote evidence-based practice that facilitated a shift towards research becoming embedded in practice. They were able to deliver improved care and negotiate pathways, and generated financial gains in terms of cost savings and efficiencies. More importantly, they were able to develop networks and collaborations, and this ensures that the changes are sustainable. Next slide, please. So how do clinical academics enable this change to happen? I've picked the NHS England change model, which was developed in 2012, and this has 8 component parts which need to be considered when implementing change. If you look at each of these, you can see how a clinical academic can bring an understanding of many of these areas through their hybrid role as both clinician and academic. If we have a look, you can see that one area includes the measurement of change. As a clinician, you will know what these key measures are. And as an academic, you'll understand what difference is significant. If you look at system drivers, again, these may be internal or external and at the macro, meso and micro levels. Again, something that a clinical academic through their research is able to undertake. Project management, well, there's nothing like planning for a PhD to develop a plan with clear deadlines for actions. In terms of tools to improve processes, an in-depth understanding of the system that you're working in, its flow, and how to facilitate quick and effective change is vital. Motivation, learning from our evidence, cutting out the waste and enabling change to happen. The adoption of new practice and anticipation of barriers. Clinical academics are cognizant of the impact of new ways of working, being iterative while celebrating successes. And of course, finally, leadership is vitally important. This demands vision, teamwork, authenticity, enthusiasm, shared learning, and clear goals. For the reasons I've set out today, I ask you to vote for the motion that supports the assertion that non-medical clinical academics add value through leadership to transformational change within the NHS. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. That was perfectly to time as well. I'm now going to hand over to the first panelist arguing against today's motion, and that is Dr. Donna Kennedy. Over to you, Donna.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you, Jackie. Do non-medical clinical academics add value through leadership to transformational change? If this question were, will they or should they, then aspirationally, yes. However, the question is, do they? And reviewing the evidence suggests that at present, they do not. So let's explore why. Next slide, please. In 2012, the Department of Health published their strategic vision for developing the role of non-medical clinical academics, recognized as an important but underrepresented part of the clinical research community. It was recognized that this ambitious goal would require national oversight, strategic vision, political commitment, and a focused local implementation. The vision wasn't just to grow the workforce, but to embed and sustain these roles over time, with non-medical clinical academics integral to the workforce. Next slide, please. So, nearly a decade on, are non-medical clinical academics at the forefront leading this transformational change? Code et al. In 2019 explored key issues related to the impact of non-clinical academics. The authors highlight that as opposed to leading change, the ability of non-medical clinical academics to attain key performance indicators was contingent on levels of influence and conditions both within their unit and their organization. That if non-medical clinical academics are to become the leaders of demonstrable and measurable change, collective partnerships, investment, and joined-up strategy continue to be required. These findings are supported by the work of Cowley et al. 2020. Non-medical clinical academic training programs have built capacity and capability for non-medical clinical academics. That's without doubt. But to explore how these clinical academic roles are operationalized, the authors conducted qualitative interviews with early career non-medical clinical academics. Their findings suggest that for the individual, academic training can be a positive, transformative experience, like walking into a new world, which I'm sure resonates with many. However, at the organizational level, non-medical clinical academics can be hindered from contributing to innovative patient care. Strategically, the managers value clinical academics, but they don't know what to do with me. Facilitating non-medical clinical academics to attain that visionary role of change leaders requires a cultural shift regarding the purpose of academic training. Academic training is more than just the acquisition of skills. It's one of personal and professional transformation. Next slide, please. Let's turn again to the recent excellent qualitative evidence synthesis published by Newington et al. The fact that it supports both for and against arguments shows to the objective nature of their review, so congratulations to them. There's a target that 1% of health professionals outside of medicine will hold clinical academic roles by 2030. Currently, however, this is lagging behind with only an estimated 0.1% in clinical academic roles. Very few professional roles outside of medicine include research time, and the aim of the authors of this study was to look at the evaluation of impact. Well, without doubt, there's substantial benefit to patient and to services that result from the non-medical clinical academic roles. What about the impact of the careers and the roles on the non-medical clinical academics themselves? Their review highlights that an absence of non-medical clinical academic career structures results in a perceived lack of value, unclear expectations, and requirements for the individual to build or craft their own role. On top of that, career anxiety. There's a lack of managerial awareness and support for these roles, and there's a limited opportunity for non-medical clinical academics to use their skills to contribute to developing clinical practice. Next slide, please. So finally, what are non-medical clinical academics saying about their role and experience? Dean and Clooney explored this in a survey of participants or users of a Facebook platform for professionals outside of medicine. The platform users all reported that they found the Facebook platform to be highly useful, both as a networking tool and for peer support. However, they noted that there was only 42% of respondents felt that the department was even aware of the benefits of having a clinical academic on their team. There is an overwhelming need for a clearer definition of the role, and the barriers to clinical academic roles commonly result in struggle, frustration, and a proportion of non-medical clinical academics don't think that a clinical academic career is a feasible trajectory. So if we said, to conclude, that non-medical clinical academics are leaders of transformational change, that would indicate that we're saying the job is done, the vision is achieved, we can dust off our hands. However, the evidence clearly demonstrates that despite the many benefits gleaned from the development of non-medical clinical academics, we're nonetheless a long way off from that aspirational vision of leading transformational change. If the NHS were a ship, would non-medical clinical academics be at the helm, helping to steer through the exciting waters of transformational change? No, Most of us would be below decks, looking to create opportunities to shine and prove our value to everyone else on board. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. If anyone has any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A box, because we're going to come to those later. Next, I'm going to hand you over to Dr. Tim Noblett, who is arguing for today's motion. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks very much, Jen. Thank you, Donna, for that. But I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. I agree that, yes, clinical academic careers are hard and maybe they're not recognised. However, if I can move on to my next slide, then arose by any other name. So essentially, we know that clinical academics are out there. In fact, I can see from the people joining the debate that a lot of them that may be mentioned in a second are actually on this call. They're there and they are leading. However, they're not known as clinical academics. They're often known as a consultant clinician or a professional lead or a fellow, or they're recognised because they sit more on the university side and they use their professor or associate professor title. However, these people are out there and they are transforming the NHS and they are leading that transformation. So if we go on to my next slide, please. Another reason that we might not know who these people are or know the good work that they're doing is that the policy within NHS England, Health Education England, NHSI, is that the authors and the acknowledgements that should come with these accolades of planning and changing don't get put on the documents. So when I have a Google of the NHS long-term plan or the people plan, the two big documents at the end at present creating change, I can't see who inputted. However, when I talked to NHSE about this, they confirmed that yes, non-medical clinical academics were definitely involved in the development of both docs. So where are these people? Who are these people? And how are they creating change? Well, if we look at a few examples now, so if we flip onto the next slide. Well, here's Dr. Joanne Fillingham. She's actually the Deputy Chief Allied Health Professions Officer, and she would describe herself as a clinical academic. In fact, when I asked her about the debate and the title of the debate, she replied, "My training as a clinical academic enables me to better identify where transformation is needed and warranted, equipping me with the knowledge and skills to lead quality improvement, supporting our NHS people and delivering quality care for people and populations we serve." Now, this is a clinical academic that daily is involved in transformation and is definitely a leader in it. If we go to the next slide. Here's another example, a consultant physiotherapist. This is Dr. Neil Langridge. He said, "My doctoral training has been vital in supporting my leadership in transformation. Critical thinking at level 8 has helped me to cut through some of the transformational changes, whilst project management skills required for doctoral work has been instrumental in creating change and evaluating impact. The ability to build presentations, search and evaluate evidence has aided all my leadership, particularly with the NHS, across NHS stakeholders and associated leadership across all boundaries." Neil has recently been involved in the development of the roadmaps in primary care, which you could argue govern the introduction of the new roles within primary care, the biggest transformation in primary care we've seen in any of our lifetimes. So if we skip on another slide. This is Emma Grahams-Clark. She's a consultant pharmacist specialising in critical care. She states that she uses her skills that she learned through her PhD to inform practice and transformation at all levels of healthcare. Emma was involved in writing the guidelines for the provision of intensive care services, versions 1 and 2, which have transformed how we work in critical care. She's also a big part of implementation of non-medical prescribing for pharmacists, which again have transformed pharmacy careers and use within the NHS, both in primary, secondary and tertiary care. If we flip onto a final slide, just to give you a couple more examples. I know we haven't got a lot of time. This is Dr. Robert Crouch on the left. He is involved in writing and transforming non-medical consultants' careers by the development of the consultant framework. And this is Deborah Harding, who's a speech and language therapist. who has developed the advanced practice supervision frameworks. All of these things transforming NHS, transforming patient care. So in conclusion, non-medical clinical academics are already leading transformational change within the NHS. However, their status as clinical academics is often overlooked, and therefore the skills they bring are extremely valued, but often not recognised. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Tim. Right, well, we're going to hand over to our last speaker of today, and that is Dr. Dominic Havestine-Franklin, who is arguing against today's motion. Over to you, Dominic.
Thank you very much, Jen. So I'm a consultant in arts therapies. Next slide, Jen. And I just want to talk about one of the first meetings I had with Brunel University to start off, because I was really trying to bridge both the NHS and academia, not as a leader, but primarily as a collaborator. And if we look at the fundamental principles of being a clinical academic, you're really ensuring that processes, policies, and standard operating procedures are in place. You're championing the role of clinical research and development of health and social care. And you're providing comprehensive information regarding strategic developments that influence clinical research. So really striving for translating research into practice. Just to reiterate Donna's point, next slide, please, Jen. That we only make up 0.1% of the professionally qualified clinical staff in the NHS. It's a tiny proportion within which we do this job. This isn't really about leadership. This is why I'm arguing against. It's about collaboration. It's about bringing people together. It's about integrating systems. And why do we need to do this? Why do we need to have these people? If we move to the next slide. Because transformational change has some huge drivers at the moment. It's around the changes in complex health and social care needs, multiple comorbidities, aging populations, increasing demand, monetary constraints. These are big drivers where leaders are really driving the change while clinical academics are investigating and collaborating. Move on to the next slide. So in which areas do we need to investigate and research and develop and understand how we translate research into practice? Well, these are 5 key areas that clinical academics are really on top of. I've listed some of the papers, it's probably a bit small, but artificial intelligence, genomics, personalized medicine, integrated care models, digital health, are all big themes today. And just to also note that in personalized medicine, Suzanne Bench is with us today. I think is one of the people at the front of collaborating and building up new systems and protocols around that. Moving on to the next slide. So I just want to dismantle leadership a little bit, because what the NHS often thinks about as being leadership isn't true leadership. What we can say is replacing the idea of leadership with collaboration. So traditional model of the top management team defining organizational goals, making decisions that lead to the direct implementation of a strategy, and ensuring that intended outputs are monitored. This is disappearing rapidly in the wake of wider social, economic, cultural, and educational change. The traditional management models, especially those with an operational focus, increasingly exposed as deficient. So it's not top-down operationalization that we're wanting to look at for clinical academics. It's really much more about integration and collaboration. So really challenging the whole idea of leadership. So very briefly, 'cause I'm conscious I don't have that much time left. Next slide. Thinking about different domains of a more collective approach to leadership, where everybody has a role in driving change. We're looking at a holistic approach. We're really trying to think about vision building. We're thinking about engaging multiple stakeholders, innovation, new ideas emerging. We're thinking about the humanness, the values that we represent as clinical academics. And we're thinking about how we draw upon collective intelligence. This is a very different way of thinking about the clinical academic role. It's not really about leadership. Next slide, please, Jen. So are clinical academics leaders? Well, if you ask clinical academics if they're leaders, they tend not to describe themselves as leaders, interestingly. So they tend to describe themselves as things like coordinators, facilitators. They're producing collaborative change processes for sustainability. They're organizational or system integrators. Yeah, this is a different idea than saying, I am a leader in this area. So this comes out of 2 studies. So my final statement, next statement please, is that really clinical academics transform services through collaboration, not through leadership in a traditional sense. So we're well positioned to coordinate transformation, as galvanizing a collective collaboration, moving towards values that are built on changing a world of shared vision making across cultures, sectors and professions. That's my argument, and that's why you should be voting against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominic. That was fantastic. Really interesting points made on both sides. I'm going to open out now to some questions that have been put through from the audience. The most upvoted question at the moment is by Teresa, and I'm going to put it to the whole panel, which is, do you think that medical clinical academics are more successful? And if so, what makes a difference? So I'm going to put that to the 4 team first, if that's okay.
I don't think they're more successful. I feel like they're supported to be successful. So the medics have a nice structure, they're remunerated, they're recognised, they get the time. What we find with clinical academia is when they're not remunerated in any way, shape or form, people often have to compromise and either have 2 jobs or 3 jobs, or they have 1 and do the other in their spare time. And then life gets in the way, or they live in an expensive city and they can't do it anymore. So I would say that they're not better, they're just better supported.
Okay, and Jackie, anything to add to that?
No, I absolutely support what Tim said, and I think some people have mentioned it in the chat. Of course, they've had a much longer established clinical academic pathway, so I think we're catching up. We will catch up, but yeah, power in numbers.
And anything from the against side to add to that?
I would agree with most of those points. I wouldn't say that medical clinical academics are more successful, but I suppose that depends on how you would measure success. They do have a greater critical mass. We can see that 5 to 6% of medics are in clinical academic roles, and having a more defined career structure offers support for them in that quest towards professorship. That underpinning lack of career structure for non-medical clinical academics can't be ignored. If you go, Tim mentioned Googling earlier, if you Google NHS jobs, search clinical academic, you'll be very hard pressed to find a non-medical clinical academic role you could apply for.
Great. Well, anything from you, Dominic, to add?
Well, I guess I would say that partly medical clinical academics work in tandem with non-medical clinical academics. So I'm just going to put forward my point again that I think they do well in collaboration with clinical academics, but I don't think it's really a competitive thing in a way. I think we kind of need each other for different roles and different, for different kinds of tasks and projects and so on. So it's, yeah, I wouldn't say one does better or worse than the other as such, but we need each other.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question is an interesting one. Do you think that currently most people who qualify as clinical academics actually end up as academic clinicians? I'm going to put that to the against side first, if that's okay.
Dominic, would you like to kick off?
Well, I mean, clinical academic is, it's a broad term, and obviously it is about investigation, understanding clinical practice, working in 2 domains and bridging those 2 domains clearly and successfully, effectively. So I think a lot of people are involved in that with different ends of that spectrum. So often people are much more engaged with clinical practice, and they, again, I mean, that produces such, brilliant material and evidence for us to draw upon for different studies and so forth. So hopefully clinical academic is positioned somewhere in the middle, and we'd support those people in moving towards that. But yeah, there's a lot more clinician academics who do a bit of academic work than there are clinical academics, and there's a lot more academics who do a little bit of clinical work than there are clinical academics. So yeah, it's somewhere a difficult transition. Yeah.
Brilliant. Anything to add, Donna?
I don't think so. I think that was eloquently answered from our side. Thank you.
Fantastic. And anything from the FOR side?
I would say that actually, I know there are other people who are talking about the value, whether you define a clinical academic as someone who's doing clinical work. I think as we move through the transition into more staff having academic qualifications, I think actually you could be an academic that is still influencing clinical practice through your role. So I think, you know, hopefully we can be merging our work together and making the change happen together. Doesn't matter whether you're in a university or an NHS trust. Tim?
And I'd agree with that. I think the difference between the two, whether you're a clinical academic or a clinician with academic skills, they're essentially the same, aren't they? What we're describing is their employer or their key employer there. So what actually we need to move forward to is maybe a single employer, maybe within the NHS, because then we get that implementation of the research because you're on the ground. However, there's fluidity. So by that I mean the NHS trust or community trust or primary care institution that you're working for doesn't say, oh no, I'm paying your wage, you need to be doing X, Y, and Z for me. We need almost a central employer, whether it be NHSE, HEE, that can maybe employ the clinical academics so that their job plans can be fluid. They can reach into trusts, they can reach into multiple trusts if they're doing a piece of research that involves multi-site data collection, without the constant barriers and without the barriers to being able to be a clinician as well as an academic.
Brilliant. I'm going to move on to another question that kind of links in well with this, and from James. So that is, what does the panel feel constitutes a clinical academic? Do you need shop floor clinical work? Is regular publications and grant income required? I'm going to put that to the FOR team first, please.
I think like we said previously, I think there are many ways to attack the changes that need to happen. So I think it's essential that you've had clinical practice. It may not be current. I know myself as a consultant speech and language therapist with an academic role, I spend 2 days in clinical practice. That really does inform me and it helps me to keep current, but sometimes it can be very challenging to do that sort of mixed role. I think definitely publishing, sharing your work is essential for any clinical academic. Otherwise, how will you get the change to happen? But also working within your organizations as well, networking nationally and internationally, all make the difference. So a multi-pronged attack.
There's only so many hours in the week, so you know there's always going to be an individual with, at any point in time, their interest is more the clinical side, or their interest is more the research side, or the dissemination side, etc., etc. So I think that's where the fluidity needs to come in. Because if you're on the shop floor working, you're going to recognize where research is needed, where transformation is needed. You can then use your skills and your links with the universities, etc., to be able to do that piece of research, but then you're back in clinical practice and you can implement that piece of research. We've just got a lot of walls around us at the minute, and those walls, I think there's gradually, as we get more and more of us, those walls are coming down, and I think events like this is pointing them out. You know, we're pointing at the elephant and we're shouting at it, and we're saying, right, let's do this. Let's form a community and take it forwards. And I think that's what we really need to do.
Brilliant. Anything to add from the against side?
Not against the discussion per se, but I very much agree with the comments that have been made already. And I think if we look at the diversity of settings that non-medical clinical academics work within, and that then has a direct impact on their ability to treat patients. So for non-medical clinical academics that might have attained professorship roles, they will have surely had many, many years of clinical experience prior to ascending to a role where perhaps they don't have direct patient care involvement at present. And in their present role, they would still be synthesizing evidence. They'd have a role in teaching and supervision, as I believe Jackie pointed out, in national committee work. So they would still have an overarching role that leads change to patient care. So I think you have a complete diversity in roles where people might be embedded in patient care, depending on the setting with which they are a non-medical clinical academic, to then to the other end of the spectrum where they're doing far less patient care, but have had that prior to.
Brilliant.
Just to add to that, I think the one of the great strengths that clinical academics bring to research is knowing the kind of clinical and strategic environment of the NHS context, and that's a lot of researchers don't really have that. And so whilst we have some specialisms and some methodologies and some different research areas, the real gift we bring to research is saying, this is what it looks like in practice, this is what the current landscape looks like, how can we make it work so it's kind of practical and pragmatic as well.
That's great. Next question I'm going to come to is from Kate, and it's currently roles and opportunities to develop as a non-medical clinical academic within direct practice roles are affected by geography. How do we address the current postcode lottery to developing clinical academic careers outside of larger established organisations? Yeah, I'll pass that over to Tim and Jackie first, please.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and a lot of organisations have been looking at geography. I as a training advocate for NIHR, have had discussions. What I advise people is it is absolutely possible. You don't have to be in a large organisations, but you do have to network, collaborate, shadow. You know, that is really key. Find the right people, and now we're in this online environment. People can support you from across the country or across the world. So do reach out, and really we're all very nice and we love to help people. So reach out and make it happen. Tim?
I couldn't agree more, Jackie. I think there's a shift which is happening, which is I personally think is really good, that it's not an expectation that you should be able to do this and this. There's a little bit of fight in there. And if you think what makes a clinical academic, or at least a doctoral level candidate, is that they go out and they do it. They're making the change, they're doing the change, they are the change. And I think if someone wants to go down that route, their personality will dictate that they do that anyway. From personal experience, you've got to go out and you've got to get it. You've got to be prepared to move. You've got to, you can do anything from anywhere. I did half of my PhD in Australia, getting leadership experience and working with the World Health Organization and Australian universities, but my PhD was in the UK. The world is now a small place, and we need to collect best evidence, best practice, and we collect it up and we bring it back to the UK and implement it within the NHS. And I think that's part of this big change at the minute, is that people are realizing that they can do that and they should do that, and it brings a breadth and kind of fresh air to the NHS that we're used to.
Anything to add, Donna and Dominic?
Dominic, would you like to go first?
Donna, do you want to go first, or?
I think I agree that although the move towards this virtual world that we're living in has been onerous in many respects, when we think about developing ourselves as clinical academics, this virtual world does reduce these geographical barriers. And when we look at whether you're at the PhD or aspiring to the PhD level or after that for funding, the types of things that we need to evidence in order to attain funding are generally around leadership activity, teaching and supervision, mentorship, international collaborations, developing a national presence. And all of those things can be done without geographical limitation, given the virtual world that we live in. So I think you also, if you are in what you would consider a geographically limited or restricted area, or you might also have insight then into how patients in your area might be a harder to reach or a harder to recruit group for research. And therefore you might have greater insights into what it's like to be in that region as a potentially excluded participant from research. So you bring unique insight, and that's maybe something you can sell.
Great. Next question is, are structures in the NHS still inherently unsupportive in terms of non-medical clinical academics? For example, research departments' main business is in a commercial research. Maybe non-medical clinical academics are less likely to be involved in commercial research. I'm going to put this to Donna and to Dominic first, please.
Well, sorry.
I'm sorry, could I just ask you to restate the question?
Yeah, of course. So are structures in the NHS still inherently unsupportive of non-medical clinical academics? So the example that they've given is that, you know, research departments are businesses, and they often want commercial research, which perhaps non-medical clinical academics are less likely to be involved in.
So just to say that, I mean, some of the first kinds of projects I was involved with were QI projects at a kind of very localized level. And I think all clinical academics in a way are looking for funded research eventually. And this is kind of a very key sort of aim, and should be part of the role in terms of managing, implementing, collaborating around funded research. But of course you have to work towards getting there, which means that pilot studies, small scale studies, service evaluations all become really important, and really important data to your local trust. So I think that shouldn't exclude non-medical clinical academics by any means. I mean, this is relevant across the board in the areas I've already identified in terms of what's required for good transformational change. Thank you.
Anything to add, Donna?
I would just say that although I wouldn't say that the non-medical clinical academic role, it's clearly not well embedded within NHS structures. However, the delivery or what we have to deliver is certainly a much desired commodity. So it's inherent for staff within, or it's demand for staff within the NHS that they become research consumers and research users, that they're able to search and critically appraise research evidence, and that they're able to then synthesize and provide best evidence care for their patients. And clinical academics are well situated to support building the capability and the capacity within their organizational structures to ensure that the staff that they work with have those skills.
Brilliant. Over to Jackie and Tim.
Yeah, I would say simply, really, you have to sell your project, sell your idea, make the change happen, really. You know, I had the same issues along my pathway until I could demonstrate the impact that I will have. It doesn't stop at the beginning. You have to do that throughout your clinical academic role, your publications, everything gets reviewed, you get rejected, you have to make a strong case. So why not start right at the beginning with your local organisation? Tim.
I think there are many points to kind of this question. So you've got the whole, clinical academia is hard. You're essentially having to train in two professions at the same time, but expected to go as fast as a single kind of trainee going up one stream. So it is difficult. I think the advantage of clinical academics is that they are embedded within hopefully a clinical department though, so they can bring that and nurture it from the beginning. So, you know, newly qualified staff often will come out of university either kind of, oh, thank God that's done. It was really hard. That volume was huge, but research wasn't the big bit that they liked. They went into healthcare because they wanted to help people, and the research modules were hard. They were difficult. People make them quite dry, unfortunately. You know, it's not the sexy part of any course, and you pop out at the end and they're like, I never want to do any of that. And of course, the advanced practice agenda has kind of forced that middle, kind of top middle gradings to have to embrace research again. Sometimes around audit, sometimes around quality improvement, which is brilliant because it's kind of, once they've really embedded in their clinical practice, it reintroduces kind of research in a domain that's accessible. I would still say it's down to the clinical academics on the ground, though, to embed this from day one, make it fun, make it enjoyable, show that it's there for a reason, and show that you can cause change, because it's that change, that is that output that makes you go, oh, that was worthwhile, it was worthwhile doing. However, we know that there are there are a limited number of clinical academics, because the career framework's maybe not sorted yet. They disappear either into a management job, and maybe they're using their skills, they still consider themselves a clinical academic, but those around don't see that, or they move into academia because that's their passion, and it got too hard. So I think those of us that can stay in one job, even if we're not recognized, do it, because you can bring that next generation. And again, it's that classic, you might not see the change in your lifetime, but the next load can. So push forward, keep doing it.
Thank you so much. We're going to have to draw the Q&A section of today's debate to a close, I'm afraid, due to time. But all of those questions are being recorded, and they're going to go on to inform the debate at a later date. So thank you. Now I'm going to hand over to each panel member, and they are going to have 1 minute to make their rebuttals and to state their kind of final last words to try and sway your opinion. So first I'm going to hand over to Dr. Jackie McRae, who is arguing for the motion that non-medical clinical academics do indeed add substantial value through leadership to transformational change. So over to you, Jackie.
Thank you. I think this has been a really interesting debate. I respect my colleagues Donna and Dominic, who have highlighted some key challenges for clinical academics in undertaking transformational change. But I think we are definitely moving towards change, and barriers do still exist, but we have to work together to remove those. There is a risk that we negate the existing change that we've undertaken by saying that we are not having impact. And my colleague Tim made a fantastic case for showing that visibility is a key issue. So we need to work on this as a key barrier. There's been a great list of people who are involved and are behind the scenes. We need to unify the mechanism that we are involved within our organisations. We need to remove the barriers, increase our visibility internally, externally, and celebrate together, and say strength in numbers. So let's make the change happen. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jackie. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Donna Kennedy for her final words.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for your arguments. It has been insightful and interesting to hear everyone's points. So clearly, non-medical clinical academics do contribute to positive change for patients and for services. And we can identify isolated examples of health professionals outside of medicine who are transforming change. They are transformational leaders. However, that is not to say that non-medical clinical academics as a critical mass, as a body, are leading transformational change. Service evaluation, audit projects, observational studies, they all contribute to positive change for patients, positive change for services, but they aren't the scope of transformational change. Transformational change requires a seat at the table where decisions are made about vision and strategic goals of an organization. In order to be at that table and participate in those discussions, non-medical clinical academics have to be elevated up to that position to have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to pass on to Dr. Tim Noblett to have his final word.
Thank you all for the debate. It's been really interesting. I would say, although Donna makes some good points there, clinical academics are there. You're about. We need to make sure that we are flying the flag. You need to use your title. The medics would. But often we say, oh, yeah, I can't put that on my name badge. I can't do this. I can't do that. I think it's time we came together as a group and flew the flag. People are flying the flag. They are at the table. We just don't know they're there. It's not hard to find them once you start to look. I can guarantee you that because I have done it. So let's, as a collective, start to nurture the next generation. Let's, as a collective, go forward and create the change within the career structure and within the NHS that we want to be part of. Let's not hide ourselves away and not think we're worthy anymore.
Fantastic, thanks Tim. And finally, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Dominic Havestine for his Havestine Franklin for his final words.
So I think in many ways, I mean, it's been a hugely interesting debate, and I feel really pleased to be part of it. But I think we're largely in agreement that clinical academics are really important and fundamental to an NHS context where you're trying to promote change and you're trying to collaborate and you're trying to influence. And so on those grounds, I think we're in agreement. And of course, we all want more of that. And I think the NHS wants more of that. I don't think it's a, and I think as I believe, I think there is a trend towards investing more in that. I do think we need to rethink the model of leadership, because actually in your arguments, Jackie and Tim, you weren't really talking to leadership. You were talking about, having presence, having influence. And I think that's different. So I would argue that out of this debate really has come that we are great collaborators and we are essential to transformative change. And Donna outlined brilliantly the kind of obstacles we're up against, which means that reality is that we are still great collaborators, but we need to build that journey together. So that's my argument against us being leaders. Okay.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Wow, that was it's been fantastic, really thought-provoking. We're really keen now to hear whether or not the panel have managed to sway anybody's opinions. So I'm going to ask Neil to relaunch the poll and we'll see where we are and feedback the results.
So just to remind you of that question, we have non-medical clinical academics add substantial value through leadership to transformational change within the NHS. Do you agree or do you disagree? Lots of votes coming in, just at 75%. We'll give it another couple of moments. A few more moments and we will also share the result of poll 1. So we're just at 90%, just a couple more moments for people to vote. Last call for votes. We will call it there. So I'm going to end polling before I share that one. So our result from poll 1 at the start of the event, 92% agreed, 8% disagreed. The results from poll 2, which I'm just about to share, 74% agree and 26% disagree. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Wow, well, I think huge congratulations are in order for both sides, really. Congratulations for the team arguing for the motion because they kept the majority of the votes, but a huge congratulations to the team arguing against the motion because they got the swing. So yeah, I think it's been a really interesting debate, interesting conversation. I'd like to thank the panel for all of their great arguments. Just to note that the panel's opinions today may not have been their personal opinions. They've obviously prepared today in the spirit of academic debate. But yeah, thank you so much to Dr. Jackie McRae, Dr. Donna Kennedy, Dr. Tim Norblet, and Dr. Dominic Havestine Franklin. Also, I'd like to thank Neil for excellent running of today's session. We couldn't have done it without you. And a huge thank you to the audience for all of your participation. There's been so much chat, so many questions that we didn't get around to answering. All of this has been recorded, and all of this data will go on to kind of inform future discussions, basically. We really hope that you can follow the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag LSBUFellows21, and also that you're able to join us for our next debate, which will be on the 9th of July and advertised through the same mediums. So thank you so much for your time, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Jen. Well
Jen.
done.
Thank you.
Well
Thank
done.
you, Jen.